Hey, welcome to the Trinity Podcast. My name is Joel. Thank you for tuning in today. Right here at Trinity, we want to help everyday people discover an extraordinary life with God. And we got a couple of our pastors here around the table, Daniel Riddick, Tom Messer, and Tommy Carr on the podcast today. And I was talking to someone this past week, gentlemen, and they made a comment to me. It was very interesting. They listen regularly. They're a faithful listener to the Trinity Podcast. And they said, if we made Trinity Podcast merch, they would buy it.
I don't even know what that would look like.
I mean, what would our merch I thought for Tommy, it could have something to do with like a word that no one knows, but he just pulls it out. We just put it across the front of the t-shirt and at the bottom put Tommy. He always uses words on the podcast. I'm like pretending like I know what that means.
So
I don't know. Would that be it?
Host specific, person specific merch. Yeah.
Yes. Word guy.
Word guy. What would Riddick be? Would he be cruise guy or?
Oh no, cruise guy.
Host guy.
No, he would be. Yes, he said he only wants to see pictures of your family vacation.
Yeah.
Or what you had for dinner. That's the only thing on social media.
Guy. Social guy.
So send those to D Riddick actually just on Facebook, right? Start posting them and then tag Daniel Riddick in it. Oh, what would Pastor Tom, what would his t-shirt be for like a merch t-shirt? What would his say? Pastor, you have any ideas of what would exemplify you on a t-shirt?
His would say on Twitter while Tommy and I are really dropping some really serious.
I'm on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter.
While these guys are talking.
But I'm also listening.
Multitask.
Yeah, multitask. There you go.
The multitasker. So comment below if you'd buy any of those t-shirts or if you got any ideas about some merch for the podcast. Well, today, after coming out of the season of March Madness, and I don't know, did y'all fill out a bracket this year for the NCAA
I actually
double?
Shared this just off the cuff on Sunday a couple weeks ago, and I described how, my wife and all her family are from North Carolina, so college basketball is like a secondary religion.
Yes.
And so we kind of married into this thing, and they have this big family tournament. So we all fill out brackets, and we're in a big text group, and everybody's got their bracket. Everybody, and including the young kids, the nieces and nephews, and all that kind of stuff. And then I concluded, this was like 2 weeks ago, and it didn't change. I was in last place. And my 12-year-old daughter was like 5 spots ahead of me. And so it's been that kind of tournament. I think it's been that kind of tournament for everybody.
Yeah. I would say so. Most brackets were busted. My wife actually has done a bracket. She doesn't do it every year, but some years she'll do one, and she goes off of mascots. Yeah, she's like, okay, would this mascot defeat this mascot? And sometimes she does really well. Just by, would the tiger defeat Fighting Irish or whatever?
Nope.
No bracket?
I used to do brackets when I was younger, and I realized the pointlessness of it.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, I just don't want to disappoint myself. So I probably quit doing them, when I was 30 years old.
Pastor, you're big on basketball. You used to coach basketball. Do you do a bracket?
I did. I don't always, but I do occasionally. And I did one and got killed because I picked Kansas, and they got knocked out early. Mm-hmm. I think I stopped. I was just looking at this. I think I stopped getting points in the Elite Eight.
I was that way too.
But I came in second in my group. So
because everybody
got killed. I mean, in fact, in our group, I think the guy that won might have had one
in the Final Four.
Oh no, one in the Elite Eight.
Oh, really? Okay. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who would have at the beginning of the thing picked San Diego. I mean, UConn probably is the only one that you could make a case if you look at it objectively.
FAU, no way.
Yeah. San Diego State.
Yeah, San Diego State, no way.
Miami's a good team. They're older and all, but you wouldn't have picked them to run through. I mean, of all the ACC teams, they would probably been my third or fourth pick to get there.
Yeah.
What's interesting is 5 years ago, whatever, ACC, SEC, Big Ten would have dominated. Then you had the upstart like Gonzaga, and none of those even made it. I mean, they just
It's a weird year for sure.
No, and in the first round, which this did my heart good, growing up in Indiana and being an Indiana Hoosier fan, to all my relatives that are Purdue fans, it was awesome
Good
to
to see
see FDU, the 16 seed, take out number 1 seed Purdue. And that's only happened twice in history. Happened to Virginia a couple of years ago. But that leads into our discussion today, because obviously when you fill out a bracket, when teams are playing in a tournament like this, there's tons of disappointment and there's failure. There's wins and there's losses. And to transition into life, there is the same thing that we would experience on a higher level. How to deal with failure, how to deal with setbacks, how to handle disappointment. It's something that we can't avoid. It's going to happen. Or how to handle success and when things go well. So that's where the conversation will be today. And we're going to lean into a couple of different things. But the first thing I'll say is this, and throw it out there just to get feedback from all of you. When it comes to setbacks, losses, failures, is there significance in going through a grieving process in a way? I know when we think of grieving, obviously we relate it to death, but when a company fails, or a relationship fails, or a loss of job, what is the significance in grieving over something that is lost or something that you miss out on in life? Because it's going to happen.
Well, a couple of things. It's always fun to jump into a conversation. It's like, you're in the deep end of the pool before you know it. Success and failure. You never let success go to your head. Success will cause you to be proud. Never let failure go to your heart. Failure will devastate you and crush you. And, I just had a conversation with somebody this morning. I said, when things are good, stop for a moment and think about this. They're not always going to be good, and they're not nearly as good as you think they are. And as good as they are, don't let it go to your head. Because as soon as you buy into that, the bad's coming. You got to deal with the other part. So that there's a rhythm about that. I think we're going to probably talk around a little bit the series that we've been in, and we didn't really do too much of a deep dive. Maybe they did in their takeoff on it, but it's amazing how Jesus didn't panic when Lazarus, he's sick, and Jesus said his sickness is not unto death. So no panic on the part of Jesus. And actually, Jesus already knew he was going to raise him from the dead, and he still wept over it. So Jesus was very emotionally connected to the story. But he said, this happened that the Son of Man, so this happened so that God could be glorified. So sometimes the success or failure in your life, while it obviously has a lot to do with you or something to do with you, there's a greater purpose involved in that. And it's God's plan and God's purpose and God's will. And so God is not just he's never just doing something to you. He's doing something in you so that he can do something through you. And if you disconnect the fact that God in his wisdom, power, and grace, his love for you, is in control of that, then you get crushed by your failures. Or you get really proud and conceited about your successes. And a good way to be is just right centered in the middle of God's will is in both your success or failure.
I think a lot of this, when you talk about grieving and acknowledging the loss, I think that can be a challenge for certain kinds of personalities. Just the way that God's naturally wired us. And I know I can kind of speak for myself. It's like I am if there's a optimist, and then you look up the definition, you can put my name there. That's kind of how I'm wired. Tommy, I think you and I are a lot the same way on this. Yeah. And so it's like I can be facing, it was a horrible day, terrible circumstance, whatever, and it's like if there's a silver lining, I'm going to find it, and that will be the thing that I talk about. And even though, unfortunately, denying probably the more actual reality, and And, you know, there are certain circumstances where that's maybe a helpful trait, you know, so you're not walking around in the depths of despair. The flip side is that if you live or kind of go through a series of seasons of life where, like, you know, you face real pain, real setback, real disappointment, and you're just kind of burying all of that, you know, and refusing to deal with it, not only does it catch up with you eventually, but oftentimes that kind of behavior can become frustrating to those around you when they are more grounded into reality, and you're kind of seemingly dismissing all of it, and they're kind of looking at you like, what's your problem? You know, hey, this is not good. You know, this is not, and so it is a needful, and I think for some more than others, a really necessary thing for us to acknowledge setback, acknowledge that there are challenges, call out the disappointments, and then get, I know we'll talk more about this, get into a process of thinking through what do those mean, and what do I need to learn about myself or others or the situation. And I the first thing that came to my mind when you said that, though, about acknowledging grief or going through that is I'm thinking about how I'm wired, and I'm thinking that is not natural for me. It is not natural for me to get into that kind of headspace.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, I think we were just joking before we turned on the cameras about, okay, so I'm 55, I'm not 70 like we talked about last week. But I think the longer you live, you get life lessons. And I think one thing to keep in, your current level of success is not your forever, because companies do more revenues one year, churches run more people one year. And so success is not guaranteed forever at the current level that you're at. And if you're not prepared for that, the first time you see a revenue downturn, it can be devastating. First time you see less people in church compared to last year, it can be devastating. And if you're not coming to grips with the fact that success is not forever, but you also have to come to the grip that failure is not final. And when failures happen, that doesn't have to be where I live forever. Daniel made a great statement. We are wired pretty similarly optimistically. So when it's funny within the church office, especially among the campus pastors, you know, if one of us suffers what we consider to be a failure, you will see each other in each other's offices. And we know what we're looking for from each other. And Daniel's like, man, I can't believe this happened. I'm like, Dan, you did a great job, man. And I think being around friends, so all of these, you know, failures, successes, I can usually tell in my own life that when I approach a failure, I've really got to go, hey, what's the right side of this? What's the positive side of this? I've been watching this special on the History Channel, The Men That Built America, and then The Food That Built America. And you'd be surprised at some of the ones that we look at, like the paragons of business and the ones you point to, how many failures they went through to get to where they are. And we just think they were always successful. Carnegie must have always been successful, but he wasn't. In his life, though, failure was never final.
If you're not failing, you're not trying.
Yeah, that would be Edison. That would be Edison. Yeah. Like when he failed on the light bulb so many times, they're like, we're a failure. He goes, no, we know 2,000 ways not to build a light bulb.
You know, one of the things that's really important is that you can't root your identity in your successes and failure. And that's what, you know, think about how we're talking in the context of how pastors are, and we're actually preaching to people, you're not identified by what happens on the best day of your life. Your identity is not determined by what happens on the worst day of your life. It is solely rooted in what Jesus did for you on the cross and your relationship with him. And boy, that makes great preaching, you know, from the stage, but it makes terrible ways to practice if you actually don't really live that out. You get that. I was talking to a guy this week, I won't go into it, but he's going through a real heartache in his life, and it kind of feels like maybe I'm not as good a dad as I needed to be or hoped I'd be. And you know, I could see the real pain in his life, and you know, I'm always in those instances, you know, just praying, God, just let me say something that will really help him.
Right.
And I said, and God always comes through, you know. I mean, if it's bad, I came through. If it's good, God came through, you know. I said, well, here's the good news. When you stand before God, there's not two lines. There's not a line for good parents, there's not a line for bad parents. And Jesus doesn't divide us out and say, oh, you messed up less than those people, so this is the line for the less messed up people, and this is the line for the really messed up people, and you're going to have to wait your turn and, you know, wait till all the other. I said, it doesn't work like that way. And it was a breakthrough for him because what he was doing slowly is he was turning his identity to whether I'm a success or failure as a parent, and he was making it up, and it really has nothing to do with you. Mm-hmm. Jesus loves us the same, regardless how your kids behave today, or Jesus loves us the same regardless. So are your revenues up, or your revenues? That's not the preaching the gospel to yourself is reminding yourself that that's true regardless of what your circumstances say. Your circumstances don't determine your identity, your success, your failures. It's your relationship with Jesus that does.
I can tell you that I know pastors, I can say this from personal experience, don't live this out perfectly, but pastoring gives you a vision that I would say does help with this, because on any given, morning, you step onto a platform and you're looking out at a group of people and there's some who are coming out of the best week of their entire life, and they're at the same moment, maybe on the same row. There's someone who's experiencing the worst week of their entire life, and then the majority of the people are just in the middle of the daily grind. You get the phone call in the morning and you're praising God because the child was born, and you get the phone call in the evening and you find out the loved one has died. And it's like, it does help elevate and keep you into a space where you realize, hey, success and failure, joy, disappointment, they're either one of those are not the whole story. And it's what Pastor Tom just said, that there obviously has to be something else then. If none of these things are always true, there's got to be something that we can ground ourselves in, which is true, and which includes all of that, but it's also over all of that, and that's where I think that's the gospel. And like I said, pastors don't live that out perfectly. I do think we have the advantage of having a vision, which allows us to put disappointment and failure and setbacks sometimes in its proper place.
So why then are we so driven as human beings to root our identity in success or failure? What is it? Is our sin nature, is our fault that we want control? Why are we so driven towards that? It
is your sin nature, because your heart is an idol-producing factory, and your heart is searching for significance, security, meaning, identity, and so it's going to make that up. It's going to attach itself to something. We're constantly saying to ourselves, if I had that, that solves all my problems. If I had that, I'd be happy. If I had that, I'd be whatever it is that you've said that you think is behind that. And once you do, you really are setting yourself, because once you get it, then you find out, whoops, it didn't really do for me what I thought it was going to do.
Yeah.
It more complicated my life. It didn't deepen and enrich my life.
Yeah, that's really good. So we look at the stages of grief. We're talking about loss. I'm interested to maybe kind of hear where you all tend to land when you face failure. If we just look at the first three, denial, anger, or bargaining. And bargaining is the idea of, if I only would have done this, or if I could have done this, things would have been different. When you face failure, which of those three do you tend to lean more towards, and how do you get out of it? What are some remedies that help you get out of that or work through that stage?
Give me the three again.
Denial, anger, or bargaining I wish I could have fixed it.
So bargaining would also get you to the kind of that guilt stage of
what I could have
done, or what I should have done.
Well, I kind of already said it. I mean, I think my propensity, personality wise, is to live in denial. Here's the 10 reasons why this isn't actually a failure. And so of those three, I'm not a guy who's dwelling on what I could have, should have, and I don't get angry either. But I think if I'm gonna fall into one of these, it's gonna be, this isn't really as bad as you think it is.
Are there any other options?
There is. There's the fourth one is depression, sadness, just this overwhelming sense of And then the last one is actually
where you're supposed to land.
It's
where you're supposed to
acceptance.
land.
Which is only this. That's where you have to get to.
Yeah.
Right.
And you have to go through the
You have to go
process
through
to
them.
get there. Yeah.
Yeah. So mine would probably not be denial. It wouldn't be anger is not going to happen. But I wouldn't even say depression. I think discouragement for me.
Yeah.
There's an internal. Here's the conflict of Tommy. Internal discouragement. Outside denial. like I feel the disappointment. Like somebody asked me, no, we're good. We're good. We're good. Everything's great. But internally, there can be a real darkness there if I'm not careful. To where I can sit there and then I may go back later and try to go, well, that's really difficult. I think my initial reaction is a disappointment, but I probably carry it outwardly where people don't see it, which is not real healthy either. I mean, that's not a healthy process. Right. But you asked the question. That's my honest answer.
That's a great answer. Pastor, how about you?
Well, I would actually say that, I think it's probably more a process of how quickly you move through those stages. I think they're all inevitable to some some level.
Yep.
I tend to be very introspective so maybe that bargaining stage would be not so much I'm trying to bargain with God or that kind of thing, but I'm really trying to process, okay, how do we get here and where do we go? And, and I do see where, that fourth stage kind of kicks in, because when you have to face reality of, hey, maybe we did something that got us here. Yeah. Maybe we got here because somebody else did something, then you have this, I'm tired of digging out of another hole, whatever. And that gets there. But when you get to acceptance, you learn this is that, if you respond correctly, you're going to be better because of what you went through. Just man falls 7 times and rises up again. It's your failure's not fatal, Now, failure to change may become fatal if you don't learn from it. Right. But you can. It sounds like it's pretty inevitable, right?
Yeah.
Even good people are going to fall again and again and again and again. What defines them, do you get up?
Yeah. And the faster you move through those phases, and I'm not saying you should rush grief or you should rush that, but like I talked to him about it a little bit, just kind of a discouraging thing happened over the weekend, right? And so, I go home and Rhoda's like, hey, it was a great day, great message. I'm like, yeah. She's like, well, what's wrong with you? I'm like, I just kind of so she's like, I might go to Walmart for a few hours. I'm like, that'd probably be a good idea. So, by the time here's what it is, within 24 hours, I've kind of accepted this is just something I didn't intend. This is not what I meant it to be. And the next day, somebody spoke some truth into my life in a setting, and I came home yesterday. I said, so baby, what we're doing? She goes, wow, welcome back. And I'm like, it just took some time to accept that highs and lows happens. False balance is an abomination. That failure is not final. Successes are never forever. And at the end of the day, I think after you've lived long enough, you get there when you move through it and say, okay, God, what are you going to teach me through this? You are my ultimate escape. You are my ultimate rescue. And I will wait patiently for you. I'll lift up my eyes to the hills. That's where my help coming from. That's the ultimate success and failure regulator.
Yeah, that's good. How are unrealistic expectations, how do they fit into specifically failures or how you process all of that? How do you manage those? And if those are out of whack, does that put you in a constant state of, how do you manage expectations?
That is such, I don't think it's the only thing, but boy, I do think a lot of what we face, especially when you get into maybe stuff that's, relationships and or even professional work, take those 2 areas of life. A lot of the disappointment that we experience is probably unnecessary because we either, for all kinds of reasons, we didn't know, nobody helped us along the way, but we just came into circumstances, either with our eyes closed, or just with, wildly unrealistic, expectations. And then when reality sets in, which is what we've been kind of describing, it's not just mountain and, you never planned or thought about the valley and then the valley shows up. I mean, it can be crushing because you just had no space to even consider that this was going to be harder than you thought it would be, take longer than you thought it was going to do, cost more than you realized it would. And there is a real value one of the things I kind of appreciate about maybe our ministry and Tom specifically, but the way we kind of go about things. Nobody, or rarely will anybody accuse us of really moving too quickly on something. You know, I mean, we're not going to be we move and we make changes, but there's a real value in counting the costs, thinking through it, having the conversations, because when you work through that, you actually get this full perspective, which sets you up to be prepared for both the victories and also the setbacks. And sometimes we get real fast into a relationship, we get running down a road, career, whatever, and we've not really counted the cost or thought through our actions deeply, and then the hammer drops. And it can be painful when you have not considered or you've not had realistic expectations about what you're facing.
You know, so we're specifically talking about disappointment with people. So unmet expectations and, you know, whatever can be painful. When you deal with relationships, you got to remember you're dealing with emotions. Like typically, here's an example. If you make a mistake with your finances, it's probably not an emotional mistake. It's pain, but it's probably not. I mean, there may be something that's connected. But if you're disappointed with a person, it's deeply emotional because that hurts intensified. And so there's two sides of it. There's a lot of books written late 80s, early 90s, even the 2000s about boundaries. And part of boundaries is managing your expectations of other people. In the 2000s, that language kind of shifted to like emotional IQ and you know, relational IQ. But it's the same idea in principle. One of the most helpful books that I've ever read on that whole thing is on how to restore margins in your life. And you need margin for time, you need the margin of time, you need the margin of emotion, you need the margin of finances. Those are all areas that you do it. So emotional margin is literally how you manage the expectations that you have of other people. And you know, I went home last night and Lisa's not teaching this week because we have a Easter schedule, and she's very rhythmic about what her days were like, and she babysat grandkids all day yesterday, and so she was in the house all day Sunday, all day yesterday, and you know, for me, Monday nights, like Sunday and Monday run together. But I knew when I left the office, even though I had a really busy full day, kind of some deep conversations that were draining, I knew that if I walked in the house, I wouldn't want to leave. And I knew her expectation. Yeah, and I don't mean that in a critical way. And so, you know, she said, "Hey, I know you're tired. You don't want to do anything." I said, "No." I said, "Why don't you meet me in the driveway?" And she had a couple real small errands. And we ended up spending 3 hours together. Now, it took work the first 30 minutes. Right. Really took work. I wouldn't have ever been able to get there if I didn't allow the reason I won that, which I don't always, is I won that in my office 30 minutes before I went home when I realized that her expectations were going to be different than mine. Now, I'm not saying I always know that, or I'm not saying there are not times I don't try to force her into my expectation. I'm not trying, but that's what it means, and you have to manage it. That's what marriage is. That's what relationships are. That's what your kids demand of you. That's what your friends demand of you. And if you don't build margin into your life for that, then you're always in this, you know, this conflict of, you know, these people, they use me, they drain me, they whatever. And we're all about relationships, and we need it.
So they say insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I think Pastor brought up there are corrective components when it comes to failure and how we manage our identity. Do you guys see any other corrective components of ways, practical, to handle setbacks, to handle disappointment? You know, you could always say, well, it's someone else's fault, but there are times you have to be like, okay, I keep finding myself in this hole. What do I need to evaluate about myself? And what are some things that I can add to help me not end up here regularly? What are some other corrective components?
You know, for me personally, when I'm going in, and there's people I love dearly. I mean, I haven't talked to them in a while, but they have this impression of me. Like when I'm verbalized this, you've never had a problem in your life. And sometimes when you hear that, and you're like, well, then that instructs me on who I have to be to people. The Superman, the man of steel that doesn't have a kryptonite. It's a great thing in self-realization and failures and successes when you really begin to know yourself. So a lot of my failures are exacerbated by the time I get to fatigue. And so I think when you see Elijah, when he's defeated the prophets, and then somebody says, by tomorrow, I'm going to take your head off your body. Well, then we find him in a darker place. And I think some of the instruction for me is personally practical instruction. When I'm facing a failure, I've got to take care of myself.
That's a trigger event.
Yes, it is. And I've got to take care of myself because I'm naturally wired. Then I'll work harder. I'll do more. I'll call more people. I'll do more things. And I wear myself down physically to where the failure actually gets larger and larger the more tired I become. So one of the main instructional points for me is when I feel a failure or I know I need to get rested and ready to face this battle that's ahead.
You need to be a quick learner and a quick forgetter.
Right.
And you can't dwell on the pain points that happen in those moments. You got to learn from them, but you can't wallow in it. And I think there's there's so many verses that come to mind, but forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth unto those things that are before. It doesn't mean, don't ever think about anything that ever happened in your past. It means don't hold on to that thing in your past and live in your past. And, your past should be a place for you to remember, not a place for you to reside. And if you carry that wound and you live there, it's going to inflict damage over and over and over again. So you got to forget and you got to move on, but you still have to learn from it. And you don't have to repeat the same mistake over again. Just learn from it, but move on. And if you can learn how to do that, it's like, what makes a really good shooter in basketball? Guy that forgets his last
short memory.
Right.
And if you can't do that,
that's very true.
If the next shot you shoot is you're thinking about the last one, you'll never hit the one you're going to shoot.
That's
you just
a very
can't
good point.
In the spirit of what it looks like to learn, there's a real tendency sometimes to avoid the problem or to ignore it. And so our way around disappointment is, well, I'm just not going to think about this anymore, which is actually, especially if you're dealing with something that you've contributed to, not providential.
Avoidance behavior.
You get into this avoidance behavior where it's like, hey, if I just don't look at this, maybe it will go away. And, we went through an interesting time. Well, everybody did, but we, like in church world, we went through an interesting time during COVID where, we have, in a healthy way, we've got all kinds of kind of data, numbers, and, you're kind of measuring, where you are, where you're going, and how things are. Well, we went to for a church, it's no secret anybody's been around church, one of the things that you look at is like your attendance. How many people showed up on a Sunday? Good to know. It's not the whole game, but it's important. Well, you go to a service, all of a sudden you stop meeting, and then you do that for weeks and weeks, and then even when you come back, it's a whole thing. And there was a time frame that maybe legitimately it was like, hey, it's not even really helpful to look at this stuff anymore because there's no reference point. We're not gathering, all of the groups aren't meeting, so there, you kind of get into this mindset where it's like, well, we have to set this stuff aside. There is and was a real tendency as things came back, where it's kind of like, hey, well, you know what, we're just not going to look at this stuff anymore. And all of a sudden you realize, well, actually there are things that do matter that we can't just keep not examining, we can't keep turning a blind eye to. And I think you could apply this in 100 different ways. It's like, hey, there are decisions in our life that we're making that result in outcomes, good and bad, and success and failure. And if at some point we don't have the wherewithal to look back and learn and recognize that as hard as it is to see this, there's a lesson to be learned here. There's something I might be able to do differently. You get into that avoidance behavior and you find yourself on that hamster wheel, where you're running and eventually you're kind of coming into the same thing over and over and over again.
Sometimes I do that with certain parts of my yard.
Yeah.
I'm not going to look at that part of my
I'm going to look over there. Maybe it'll go away. Maybe it'll cut itself.
Yes.
Here's a good principle. This is not natural for me. I'm more naturally wired to be the opposite. But the older I've gotten and the longer I've done this, I usually start every week and every day with this question. What is the hardest thing I have to do this week? Mm-hmm. What's the hardest thing I have to do today? And I do those first. Yep. It's amazing how you get rid of the worst thing you got to do. The rest of your day always goes good.
It's a lot easier.
It's all downhill. Yeah. If you do the hardest thing you got to do in a week, I had an unexpected thing come up yesterday. I was it forced me to talk to a couple of our guys, and I said, are we on top of this? And it wasn't, they said no. And I'm like, my tendency was, well, you guys better figure out how to get on top of this. And then I realized it was going to come back to me no matter what. There was no way around it. And I said, okay, I'll handle it. Well, no. Do you want? No, I said I'm going to handle it because I don't want it to be on you, and I don't want it to be on you, and I don't want it to be on me. I want to get done with it.
Yeah.
And it ended up being a lesser deal than I thought it was going to be. It kind of resolved itself pretty easily. But man, I felt that's probably why I was able to say to Lisa, "You want to go do something?
Let's go
do something."
Walmart.
I probably would have gone and gotten to bed.
I'd been in ICU somewhere. But the point is, if you do the hard things. And that's the avoidance behavior. The opposite of avoidance behavior is if you're going to lead, if you're going to be a healthy leader in your home, you're going to be a healthy leader in your relationship, you're going to be a healthy leader in whatever it is, your career, vocation. Figure out what the hard things are and do them. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to do them perfectly. Nobody does. But you do them, everybody frees up. Everybody. My doing that one issue yesterday actually freed up 5 or 6 people that didn't have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, today, the rest of this week, it's done. It's over. It's just got to be handled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in our mission statement, it says a lot about the word together. Come together in worship, grow together in groups, serve together on teams, go together on mission. How does that word together fit with failure and success? Why is it important to have community around us on both sides of that spectrum?
I'll share a personal story real quick. I have this like real visceral remembrance of this moment. So, and I've talked about this before. A number of years ago, my dad died from cancer, and I was at Oak Leaf pastoring and preaching every weekend, and so it was fairly understood what was going on in my life. It was kind of hard to I was gone a weekend for a funeral and all that, and so I remember just. Really, and I think I said this to Jen, I was like, I just do not want to go back to church on Sunday. I had to go back and preach the next Sunday.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I don't want to do this. Not because I didn't want to preach. I was actually great with doing that. I was like, I just don't want to have this conversation 100 times, And there was real quick, there was a pull for me to go, you know what? I think I'd rather just kind of be alone and think through all of this and feel all of what I'm going to feel in.
Right.
I went. Because I had to go. But when I got there, the experience could not have been more opposite of what I thought I would. In other words, being around the people and hearing the words of comfort and that we were loved and appreciated and all that. I mean, it was incredible. And if I would have had my way, I would have never have chosen it. But community is so vital. When you faced seasons of disappointment and failure. But it is also, I think, kind of in the flesh, I think it is not not what we're drawn to. But it is, God's wired us for it, and designed us for it. And so, man, it is so important when you hit those moments that you don't go through those seasons alone.
Well, it's the Romans 12, rejoice with those that rejoice, weep with those that weep. Do you really win if there's nobody there to celebrate with, right?
Right.
Like, think about, you've made hole in one, right?
2 of them.
All right, so think, how awkward would it be?
Look around.
I think about that all the time.
And then everybody's like, yeah, sure you did.
Right?
Sure you did, buddy.
And then even picking on the same illustration, think about how, if you say, oh man, I came within 2 inches of having a hole in one, but nobody was there, nobody's going to believe you. I mean, right? So you got to get both sides of, hey, you got to have somebody to celebrate, you have somebody to, to commiserate with. And that is the essence of Christian community, the love one another. It's that you're not designed to walk through pain and suffering by yourself. And you need people to be there with you. Now, here's where we make our mistake. The reason that we've resisted is because you think, man, somebody's going to say something and it's not going to be, or I'm going to have the same trite, conversation or whatever. But in reality, it's not what people say. It's that they're there. It's that you find out they really care about me. Right. It really matters, and that does something. Again, that's emotion. That's what does something for your inner life. I think we get this way, and I've been thinking about this a lot, even in my preaching over the last 6-8 months. We tend to struggle with the balance between realism and idealism. Idealism is your feelings would never get hurt. Right? Nothing would ever bother me. Right. That's idealism. Realism is it happens. Right? Now it's how do you process that out? And I think what we have to do with people is to be real that those feelings that you have, it's very real to say, I don't want to go to church. I don't want, and maybe, and we got to be careful we don't say it the wrong way, but people are going to wear me out or people are going to whatever. Realism is they need to minister to me and encourage me, and I need that in my life. I'm not so good and beyond it that I can't benefit from it, and they can't fully express the comfort of love that comes from people that care deeply about you if you don't let them. And you have to find that balance. So much of Christianity tends to get to that extreme of, we want to create superhero Christians, that nothing ever, no. I mean, Jesus wept. He knew it, and he still wept, right? Yeah. And he wept not just for him, he wept for us. And so we have to get that into our own psyche and thinking that we're built for community. We're designed to be in relationship. Your kids need to see it. Your wife needs to experience. Your friends need it. The church needs it. It's all part and parcel. Our church is never better than when it's responding and showing care and meeting needs and doing it authentically. Yeah. And whether that's over a grief or it's over a physical need or if it's a missional thing that we're trying to do, it's the doing that together is what it's the full expression of the body of Christ.
I don't think and I heard you say twice in that sentence that we're wired for a relationship, we're designed for it, but man, sometimes it just doesn't feel like that's what we want to do. I mean, I know we're best when we're that way. I would probably tend more when failures or disappointments or tragedies occur. I'm probably more Jonah sitting under a juniper tree, just going, you're probably going to take that away too. That if I'm not careful, I can get there in my spirit. So I think it takes a determination to say, listen, I'm going through a rough time. I need to be around the people of God. Similar story. So my dad will be dead 20 years this Easter, actually. It's been 20 years. So I did the same thing. So am I going to teach the next Sunday? And I told Rhoda, I said, she goes, I think it'd do you just good to be around the people of God. I said, well, if I'm going to be there, I'm going to teach.
Yeah.
And I can remember standing up in that Sunday school class. There was 120 people there. Just took my Bible, and I'm like, I don't even want to look up. I mean, it was just that deep in my heart of disappointment. So when I looked up, you could have not seen the face of Jesus would have been the only thing that would have usurped that feeling of 120 people that love you, that are for you, that are there on the journey. And it was one of the most, I hate to use the word cathartic, but it's the most cathartic experiences. Right. And they weren't over engaging. They just were, like Tom said, they were just there. Yeah. They were just present.
Well, I think it's part and parcel too that people that do ministry have a hard time receiving ministry. It's, now I'm not saying that's always true, but I think principally you have to behave in a way. And, there's lots of times I find myself saying to people, because they want to reciprocate even in their pain. And I don't need them to reciprocate. I'm not there. I'm not doing this to you or for you because I need you to do something for me. I'm doing this for you because I care deeply about you, and you have a need that I want to try to meet in your life. When you get into that mode a lot, it's very hard to have the whole role reversed, and you have to be on the receiving end. For me, it was like all the times I'd been to the hospital and prayed with people before they went into surgery. And, I'm in the waiting room getting ready to go in surgery. And I'm telling you, my mind was obsessed with, I don't want anybody to come in here. I mean, that was the thing that I didn't want to have happen. And in Jim Kilpatrick, who, I love deeply.
He didn't care about that.
He didn't care. He's coming through the wall.
I mean, he came in and, it was just very powerful. And it's, even though it was hard on one level, it was like, yeah, that's exactly what I needed. Whatever it was that I needed, I got in that. And then it was the Lord reminding me, you're no different than anybody else. If it works for them, it has to work for you.
It's funny how the Lord does that. So like Paul Harvey, the rest of the story. So my dad passes away. You're very familiar with that. So that week I was not inconsolable, but I just wanted to be by myself. And there was probably a moment, it's even like, I don't even know if I want to re-engage. I mean, there was a little disappointing failure of, man, I've done everything right here for 30-something years, and this is it. So I was sitting there watching the nature show. Like, I was just there watching a nature show, and I'm upset and just a little mad. Rhoda's gone. I'm by myself in the house, and we're watching this whole herd of wildebeest, and they're running, and you see the predators out there. And then this one little wildebeest decides to take its own little. And I literally said out to the television, I went, you stupid wildebeest, you stupid animal. Why would you ever leave the pack like that? You know you're going to be eaten. And it is almost like the Lord went, you're the wildebeest. Yeah. You're the wildebeest. You're sitting here at your house by yourself, and you've never been more vulnerable than to somebody who's trying to seek to devour you. That was you need to get back into the herd.
Yeah. Disappointment and failure are really hard. And if you want to make it harder, try to do it alone. I mean, that is just the bottom line. It's hard no matter which way you slice it, but it's harder if you do it in isolation.
Yeah. Hey, great conversation today, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And remember, failure's not final. You've heard some great truths that have been good for me to hear today. Preach the gospel to yourself. Don't face failure or success alone. Surround yourself with a good community of believers. Hey, if this is your first time listening in, thank you so much. Who knows? We could have merch on sale next time you listen in. But if not, that's okay. Make sure you watch us on YouTube or Facebook. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the Trinity app. Thank you for joining us on the Trinity Podcast.